It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson's feeling better. We got a great show for you. He is going to talk a little bit about COVID-19, but then we're also going to talk about the zero-day exploit that affects all versions of Windows and how you can fix it, and why RowHammer is not about to go away anytime soon. It's all coming up next on Security Now. Security Now comes to you from Twit's LastPass Studios. Stay in control when it comes to your company's access points and authentication. LastPass makes enterprise-level security simple. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson. Episode 759, recorded March 24th, 2020. TRRespass. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by Privacy.com. Privacy lets you make purchases online using virtual cards instead of real ones, protecting your identity and bank information on the internet. New customers get $5 to spend on their first purchase. Go to Privacy.com/securitynow to sign up now. And by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Thinking about moving your data storage to the cloud? Wasabi is enterprise-class cloud storage at 1/5 the price of Amazon S3 and faster than the competition, with no fees for egress or API requests and no complex storage tiers. Your business may be unpredictable, but your data costs shouldn't be. Start a free trial at wasabi.com. Enter the code SecurityNow. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your security, your privacy, talk about computing. It's really a great show for anybody who's interested in these matters. And, of course, it's all because of this guy, Steve Gibson, the man about town. He's in a top hat and tails today with a little – because he's feeling better, right? You're feeling better.
A little less yes, the fact that I'm here, I may, like that, cough a little bit. I have a –
do it in your sleeve.
The thing
okay.
that's – yeah, the thing that's enduring is it's a very like the tail end of just a dry, non-productive cough.
Right.
So there is a respiratory component, which never got very bad for me, fortunately. But that seems to be hanging on. But I got most of my energy back.
Good.
Although I have to say, Leo, I got knocked on my butt after last week's podcast.
Oh, really?
Lori looked at me and she said, "Okay, honey, now remember this when you're considering doing it again." And I said,
that took it out of you.
No,
that took it out of you.
It really did.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I'm glad I did it, and I'm feeling really back up to snuff. Oh, it was my decision. I could have said, can't do it, but I don't want to break my record, Leo.
Well, it's unblemished despite illness.
We have for our 759th podcast, Trespass is the title with 2 R's. TRRespass. We're going to essentially take a look at where we are 6 years downstream from the RowHammer revelation.
Wow. It's that long? It's been 6 years?
Half this podcast ago.
Wow.
Yes. So we're going to take a look at a new unpatched zero-day attack found in the wild, being currently used in limited fashion against billions. Well, there are billions of potential Windows users, but it's currently being selective. Microsoft knows about it. They have not patched it. We're going to wait 3 weeks, which is when the April Patch Tuesday occurs.
Are you talking about the type flaw, the 0 day with type rendering?
Yes. The font, the font Adobe rendering. Font rendering attack. There are some mitigations we'll talk about, and so anyway, we'll get to that. Also, Mozilla reversed themselves on TLS 1.0 and 1.1 deprecation.
Good. I think.
We're going to take a welcome look at a micropatch for Win7 and Server 2008 for things that are maybe important, which Microsoft is never going to fix. So we're beginning to walk down this road now of encountering important things which are continually being discovered in a version of Windows that still has not now half, but still close to half of the user base. We've also got Chrome's and Edge's altered release schedules, Avast's latest screw-up. We have a new threat affecting Android users, the results of last week's virtual PwnToOwn competition.
That was pretty funny. They mailed in the exploits.
We have a few observations about the coronavirus math that I wanted to point our listeners to, or just some things to think about. And also, I'm going to share 2 more of my shortcuts for 2 really amazing videos that I've discovered since last week. You've seen them both. I think I've sent them both to you, Leo.
Yes.
And then we're going to dig into RowHammer, where we are after 6 years.
Wow.
And, of course, we have an apropos, very nerdy picture of the week.
We do indeed. We have a couple of advertisers, too. So let me get in one of the ads now, and we can get the other one in a little bit later. And this one is one that I know you support and agree with. We've talked in the past, in fact, about the idea of a one-time credit card number, a number that is good for one charge only and then self-destructs, or
privacy.com.
Privacy.com. You know who I'm talking about. Or a credit card number that is attached to a specific merchant, can't be used by anybody else. These are so useful. Privacy.com. You don't use the same password everywhere. We know that's a bad idea. Why are you using the same credit card number everywhere? And you know if it's ever been breached, and whose hasn't been breached at this point, what a pain it is to cancel all the subscriptions, all the merchants, everything attached to that credit card when you get the new one. It's just not fun. Privacy makes it so much easier. So much easier that I use it whenever I buy anything online. I've created literally dozens of virtual credit cards attached to merchants, online stores, subscriptions. Great for subscriptions. How many times have you subscribed to something and then forgot, and you keep getting the subscription and the billing month after month, and then you got to figure out how to cancel it, and the website is complicated. With Privacy, I just pause the credit card. They can't charge it. You could delete it or you could pause it. Pausing it's nice because you can always resume it if you want to keep that subscription going at a later date. They have a browser extension from the Chrome Web Store. There's an Android app, an iOS app. I use it all the time. You can just log into the privacy.com website as well. You'll get a brand new virtual Visa or MasterCard number for every purchase you make online. Every one of them has a expiration date 5 years in the future from today's date, which is awesome. I always know what the expiration date is because this is March 2020, so I know that it'll be good through March 2025. I mean, I always know it'll be 5 years down the road. You get a unique security number. The other thing I like about it from a privacy point of view is they don't care what address, what name, what zip code you use to attach the card. They know it's your card. Privacy does. But the merchant doesn't have to get any of that information. So you can be John Doe, Anytown, USA, 00000, and Privacy will let it go through, but the merchant won't get that important information. I think that's really good. You not only take control of your finances, you take control of your privacy. You could set a spending limit. I do that, by the way, by charge, by month, or by year. So I'll always set the spending limit so that even if, only that merchant can use it if it's a multi-use card. But even if they say, oh, I forgot to charge them, let's charge them again, it won't work. I love that idea. It's also great for free trials. When you sign up for a free trial, just use that card and make sure it's a one-time only use. You're never accidentally billed twice, upgraded without your consent. You totally control it. They have a new card sharing feature, which I use with my daughter all the time. She needs a credit card to buy something, and I can easily and safely send her a privacy card. Just a few clicks right from the dashboard. That's on the desktop application. Eventually, they'll get it to the Chrome extension. But I use it in Firefox, so they have a Firefox extension too. But that's great. You don't have to put it in a text message. It's secure sharing, so no copying, no pasting, no screenshots. And you can always say, this is good for one charge, which my daughter is always a good idea. So, honey, you can use it, but it's only going to be good once. I think this is so great. You create the card, press the share button, Privacy handles the rest. Of course, it's just like any other card. It's PCI DSS compliant, same security standards as your bank. It is not a charge card. You're not running up a balance on that card. You set it up attached to a debit card or your bank account. That's what I do. So it's immediately debiting. It's like a debit card, but That's important to understand. You're not going to be charging it. Of course, they use strong encryption on all the sensitive information. In fact, they do something cool. They use split key encryption, partial keys held by separate employees, so no single employee can access the sensitive info on the server about what cards you're using and things like that. Privacy never sells your data. Your information is always safe with them. Now, there's 3 plans you should know about. There's the free plan, which is the first plan I used. 12 cards a month. For most people, that's enough. Secure, merchant locked, or single use. You could choose between 2 paid versions as well. And I upgraded to the Pro version because it's $10 a month. But listen how this works. You get more cards, 36 cards a month, 3 times the number of cards. But you also get 1% cash back on all purchases. And I use privacy enough that 1% not only pays for the $10 a month, but then some. I make money on the card. So that is a very nice feature, the 1% cash back. You pay $10 a month for that, but I never have to pay for it because I use privacy so much. I always have more than $10 in cash back. If you own a small business, you're in charge of a team, the team's option is $25 a month. That gives you 60 cards plus a dedicated account manager, a lot more control. You can have transaction limits that tailored to your business needs, things like that. So take a look. Go to privacy.com/security now. Please use that address so they know you saw it here. Privacy.com/security now. Sign up for an account. And just as a thank you and to get you to use that special address, you're going to get $5 to spend on your first purchase like that, just for a limited time only as a way of thanking you. Free money, but go to privacy.com/security now. Sign up now. This is a great way to protect yourself and your money online, and I have been using it for a couple of years now, and I couldn't be happier. Privacy.com/security now. Steve Gibson.
So a listener of ours by the name of Tony Davis emailed this picture of the week to me, saying he thought it would be perfect given the current state of the world, and I have to agree. It is a sort of a sign that reads, "Please stay at 127.0.0.1. Don't be 255.255.255.255.
Now, I know 127.0.0.1 is home, local home.
Correct.
What is 255 quad 255?
So all Ethernet controllers and internet-connected devices will accept that they will listen to anything coming from there. That's the broadcast IP.
I get it.
So it's perfect. It's like, don't be broadcasting, whatever it is you might have.
Please stay at home. Don't be broadcasting. I love it.
Exactly. It's perfect. So
very clever.
Thanks for thinking of us, Tony. And I did not have this in the show notes. I stumbled upon my note about it after this had all been put to bed, but I wanted to let our listeners know, for those who have certainly kids and maybe young adults at home, Amazon has created something known as Audible Stories. They said, for as long as schools are closed, we're open. Starting today, kids everywhere can instantly stream an incredible collection of stories, including titles across 6 different languages, that will help them continue dreaming, learning, and just being kids. All stories are free to stream on your desktop, laptop, phone, or tablet. It said, explore the collection, select the title, start listening. So basically, they're helping the parents of stay-at-home kids by saying, we're going to make our audio book collection available for kids at home. So, give them something to do, which I think sounds like a great thing. So just wanted to mention that. Okay, so as you correctly guessed what the first issue of the day was, which are 2 new unpatched 0 days affecting billions of Windows users. Their advisory, Microsoft's advisory, was published just yesterday on the 23rd of March, titled Type 1 Font Parsing Remote Code Execution Vulnerability. They said, Microsoft is aware of limited targeted attacks that could leverage unpatched vulnerabilities in the Adobe Type Manager library, and is providing the following guidance to help reduce customer risk during until the security update is released. They said 2 remote code execution vulnerabilities exist in Microsoft Windows when the Windows Adobe Type Manager library improperly handles a specially crafted multi-master font, Adobe Type 1 PostScript font. They said there were multiple ways an attacker could exploit the vulnerability, such as convincing a user to open a specially crafted document or viewing it in the Windows preview pane. They said Microsoft is aware of this vulnerability and is working on a fix. Also, they're aware of attacks in the wild, thus it's a 0-day. They said updates that address security vulnerabilities in Microsoft software are typically released on Update Tuesday, the second Tuesday of each month. This predictable schedule allows for partner quality assurance and IT planning, which helps maintain the Windowsy blah, 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 blah. So basically they're saying, we're sticking to Patch Tuesday for this. Coincidentally, and unfortunately, this is one of those months which has the latest possible Patch Tuesday, where the 31st of March is The 31st of March is next Tuesday. So the first is the following Wednesday, and the second Tuesday is as far back as it could be. So 3 weeks from today, essentially. Both of the unpatched flaws are known to be used in limited targeted attacks, and they impact all supported versions of the Windows operating system, I guess because the Adobe Font Type Manager library has been there through all of them. Windows 10, 8.1, Server 2008, 12, 16, and 19, and Windows 7, which, of course, we know for which Microsoft ended their support, as they did for Server 2008 in January. The vulnerabilities reside in this Adobe Font Type Manager library, which is a font parsing and display subsystem used by Windows Explorer to display the content of a file in the preview or the details panes without users needing to open it. So this is potentially a you don't have to do anything exploit. It's also used by many pieces of third-party software. It's part of Windows. So third-party software can just presume that this library will answer the call. The problem is that the Type Manager library is improperly handling a specially crafted multi-master font in the Type 1 PostScript format. And it allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary malicious code on target systems.
Who was it said interpreters are hard? Oh, yeah, Steve Gibson.
Yes. So the obvious attack route involves convincing a user to open a specially crafted document or viewing it in the Windows preview pane. It's not clear whether the flaws can also be triggered remotely over a web browser by convincing a user to visit a web page containing specially crafted malicious OTF fonts. And there are multiple ways an attacker might be able to exploit the vulnerability. And interestingly enough, Microsoft mentions the WebDAV, the Web Distributed Authoring and Versioning Client Service, as another vector into the system. So it's clear we're not going to get anything.
Microsoft's implementation of WebDAV or WebDAV in general? Because
WebDAV
is widely used.
Right. So it's not. It's just that WebDAV is a way in to get to this faulty library.
Right. Well, there's lots of ways to get to the library. That's easy.
Yeah. So they are all offering some workarounds. I like the final one, which is final in several senses.
Install Linux, right?
That's the Leo solution.
I swear to God,
right.
I don't run Windows on any machines anymore. It's just ridiculous.
No.
It's ridiculous. No. This is all versions of Windows too, right?
Yep.
Even Windows 7, all versions. Windows 10.
Yes. And Microsoft knows of it. It's being used in targeted attacks.
0 day. It's a 0 day.
It's a 0 day. And we also know that 0 days are kept quiet and sneaky until they are discovered, at which point they then change their tactic. They want to get everybody they can before the patch shuts them down. So, yes, Microsoft, when you posted this news It was used in
Immediately.
selective, targeted, stealthy attacks. Now it's probably being sprayed because they want to do as much as they want to get as much action out of this before it is shut down.
It's now or never. Yeah.
And again, Microsoft is using apparently the fact that it is in targeted attacks to say, well, 3 weeks, that's not going to be so bad. Good luck. So it is possible to set there's an option under the view settings of Windows Explorer, the thing that we use for viewing our files in Windows, not Internet Explorer, Windows Explorer, or just Explorer. You can turn on a checkbox, always show icons, never thumbnails. So if you enable that, then what that does is that prevents Explorer from going out to Adobe and asking for its help in rendering a thumbnail to show you in the preview pane or in the summary pane. So you can turn that on if you want to thwart this one avenue in. However, they also recommend disabling the web client service under Windows. And you could do that by going to the Windows services, scrolling all the way down to W's, where you'll find Windows Web Client. And mine was set to manual and auto trigger. They want you to set it to disabled, so nothing will start it. And so that helps you solve another, like a different entry into the system. But
nobody except you and people who know what they're doing is going to know about this or do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that our listeners who listen because they like these little kinds of.
This is why you listen. Yeah.
Exactly. They'll be safe. But the rest of the world is now subject to 3 weeks of probably an escalating attack using this.
You couldn't pick a worse 3 weeks, of course, because everybody's working from home. They took those Windows machines home. If I were a bad guy, you know what I'd do? I'd take advantage of that time, get on as many systems as possible, so that when they're brought back to work, you could have some fun.
Well, also we are seeing a sadly predictable, huge upswing in coronavirus leveraged attacks. So I know, it's just unbelievable. We talked last week about some actual DDoS attacks on medical infrastructure. I did see one little note saying that some of the ransomware people were going to lay off the health services industry during this time.
Yeah, I hope that's universal. No.
Yeah. Anyway, so the problem would be that if this can be leveraged in a social engineering attack, this is a time when lots of people are very worried about this problem and are thus more subject to not thinking before they click. And so, as we've often said, we haven't used this little pithy bit of advice for quite a while. It's never download anything that is offered to you.
Period.
That's a golden oldie.
Yep.
Period. If something says, you need to update your Flash player, no. Never download something that is offered. Only go and get it yourself if you have reason to believe you need it. Yeah. Because, first of all, everything seems to be working just fine without this thing that you're now told you need. So just blow it off. Just no. Okay, but just to finish, in the show notes, I've got Microsoft's good advice, which they saved to last because it's the most onerous, and that is to rename this DLL. It's atmfd.dll. And there are two scripts, one for 32-bit systems and a double-length one for 64-bit systems. It switches you use it from the command prompt. I'm sure you have to be an elevated command prompt, an admin command prompt. Switches you to the Windows directory system32, then runs the take own command to take ownership of that DLL, then runs the access control list utility icacls.exe, saving the existing access control list for atmfd.dll into a temporary file, then grants admins access to the DLL, then renames, which you are now an admin, renames atmf.dll to x-atmf.dll. Basically, that just means that no one in the system that expects to be able to simply load this Adobe Type Manager DLL will then succeed. So that forecloses all access to it. Again, limited targeted attacks. It's unlikely that any individual that we're talking to will get hit by this, but in the interest of caution, if presumably in 3 weeks, the update will replace this DLL with the right one. So the old one, the x-atmf.dll, and on 64-bit systems, you have to do it twice, because there's the 64-bit systems have the old 32-bit and the new 64-bit versions. So it does it twice, but it's quick to do. And if I were concerned, that's what I would do. It just removes this ATM, this Adobe Type Manager DLL from your system by renaming it to something that's, will never be seen. And then in 3 weeks, the update will replace that empty slot with a fixed ATM DLL.
Now, do we blame Adobe or Microsoft for this?
I don't know. And maybe that explains the delay. If this were Microsoft's own code, they'd be able to say, ooh, crap, and jump on it immediately and fix it. It may be that because this thing is actually an Adobe problem,
right.
They've had to work through just the intercorporate stuff, and Adobe said, we'll work on it and get it to you in a couple weeks.
So these Type 1 fonts are an Adobe font style, and usually on
they're
Windows.
They're the early.
They're early, right?
Fonts. They've
then
been around
TrueType
forever.
took over, and so you see those OTF fonts are the older ones, and TTF are the newer ones. And the Type Manager was necessary, I guess, for rendering the fonts. But it might be a Microsoft product that's labeled Adobe Type Manager because it's for managing the Adobe Type 1 fonts. So it's unclear, right?
Yeah, and I was about to go click on it and check its properties because we could see where it came from. Except that even if it came from Adobe, Microsoft might take ownership of it and wrap it in their own shell.
So you're looking for ATMFDDLL.DDL, right? That's if you delete that, you're good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's two of them. Is there one 32 that says ATMFD32.DLL or? Yeah.
Well, actually, they're in different directories, so they're all ATMFD.DLL.
I just hate how Windows is made. Oh my god!
It's they've had this really awkward problem.
There, yeah.
Yeah, and we've got the program files x86, which was and then they decided, we made a mistake with that, so we're going to abandon that approach.
Ugly.
It's really become it's really become a problem through the years. Yeah. There is a registry tweak also in the show notes that applies to Windows 8.1 and earlier. So if you are a Windows 7 user, you could apply this registry tweak that should take it offline and out of service, and then that should be good also. It's it's a mess.
Yeah, it's in the show notes, but it's not as a download. It's a actual edit you have to do. Is that? Oh my God! Yes, no one's going to do this.
Yeah, look at it. It's just a mess.
It's the HKey local machine software, Microsoft Windows NT current version, Windows disable ATMFD equals DWord : Can you just write 1, or do you have to write 000000001?
I think you can write 1.
It's just true.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Okay.
So our listeners all know that exists for 3 weeks. Then they're going to fix it. So you could rename the DLL if you like. You could turn off some display things in Windows, or not worry about it. Who knows? Microsoft, not Microsoft, I see a big M, and I think Mozilla reversed itself on TLS version 1.0 and 1.1 deprecation. Get this, Leo, due to the coronavirus. As we know, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, TLS 1.0 and 1.1 was going to be dropped on March 10th, 2 weeks ago, with the release of Firefox 74, which is the current release. It's what I'm using now, to improve the security, as we know, of website connections so that sites not supporting the better protocols, 1.2 or 1.3, would then start showing a blank page. I mean, the big scary warning, secure connection failed error page. I mean, it was going to be, we're not just saying not secure anymore, we're saying no. And remember, the plan was nobody's going to make this change until they're forced to. The UK firm, can't remember their name, Netcraft, their survey showed that this month there were still 850,000 websites not yet offering 1.2 and 1.3, still only offering 1.0 and 1.1. But then coronavirus happened. And I've got a link to their release notes, and their release notes show, they say, we have disabled TLS 1.0 and TLS 1.1 to improve your website connections. Sites that don't support TLS version 1.2, and they meant 1.3, will now show an error page. That is crossed out in the release notes for edition 74 of Firefox.
Oh, and I love the reason why.
We reverted the change for an undetermined amount of time to better enable access to critical government sites sharing COVID-19 information.
Oh, my God.
So, essentially, coronavirus just tipped the balance enough that apparently some government sites were among those 850,000 that have not yet gotten their act together and moved to 1.2 or 1.3. And Mozilla was realizing that their users, their Firefox users, were getting connection failure when trying to go to those sites. So they said, whoopsie, and backed out and leaving 1.0 and 1.1 on. To check that, and any of our listeners can, SSL Labs not only has the famous server-side check, but they've got a browser client-side check. So you can go to sslabs.com and select, I think it's the second one down on the right, the client test, which will quickly check your client for which protocols it supports. And I went there with my Firefox 74, and it showed it supported 1.3 and 1.2, and it was all happy about those. And it supported 1.1 and 1.0, which was red. It did not like the fact that my browser still supported those, but it showed, yes, they are supported. So at some point, presumably, who knows when, and I was wondering whether, and I didn't have a chance to check this, whether Chrome also reversed themselves, because this was all being done. Remember, Chrome and Mozilla and basically Chromium, Mozilla and Safari were all in lockstep with this. I hope everybody backed off if there actually were sites, as presumably Mozilla discovered, that were not coming up if 1.0 and 1.1 were blocked. Anyway, so it's been reversed, and this the pressure campaign will resume once it's no longer a health critical issue for Mozilla's Firefox users.
That's interesting. Boy, I wonder what government sites are still using TLS 1.0 and 1.3. Yeah, it must be 1.3.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 1.1, hopefully 1.1. Okay. So, it's not that those are obviously bad. I mean, it's not like they're broken and you can actually decrypt traffic.
They're just not secure enough.
Yeah, they're not what we would want to be using moving forward. So, and presumably the sites are informational. They're
Right.
They're not requiring high security credentials and so forth. So it's like, let people get there rather than not.
Yeah.
Probably makes more sense.
Worse to break the site in this case.
Yeah. Okay, so I think moving forward, and it'll be interesting to watch the slowly dwindling inventory of Windows 7 and Server 2008 machines on the internet. But this notion of micropatching, you and I have talked about it a couple times. You've been a little hesitant, worrying about these guys. But if you look at them, they really do look like the real deal. Okay, so where are we? On Patch Tuesday of this month, we learned of the CVE ending in 0881. It's a remote code execution vulnerability affecting all versions of Windows. But of course, Windows 7 and Server 2008 didn't get it. Microsoft said, a remote code execution vulnerability exists in the way that the Windows Graphics Device Interface, GDI, handles objects in memory. An attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could take control of the affected system. An attacker could then this is critical. This is a critical vulnerability in GDI. An attacker could then install programs, view, change, or delete data, or create new accounts with full user rights. Users whose accounts are configured to have fewer user rights in the system could be less impacted than users who operate with admin rights. Unfortunately, we know that privilege escalation exploits are widely available also. So this should be, should provide not much sense of refuse or
refuge.
What am I trying to say? Refuge. Thank you.
or refuse.
So there are multiple ways an attacker could exploit the vulnerability. In a web-based attack scenario, an attacker could host a specially crafted website that is designed to exploit the vulnerability, then convince users to view the website. So, in other words, just bringing up a web page. An attacker would have no way to force the users to view the attacker-controlled content, except that, opening the web page. An attacker could convince users to take some action, typically by getting them to open an email attachment or click a link in an email or an instant message. In a file sharing attack scenario, an attacker could provide a specially crafted document file that's designed to exploit the vulnerability and then convince users to open the document. Okay, so right now, this remote code, this critical remote code execution vulnerability has been present for 2 weeks since March 10th, and it's never going to be fixed unless we micropatch. So we have, absent a micropatch, a potentially exploitable flaw in Windows 7 Server 2008, which Microsoft will never patch. If nothing is done, it will persist forever. It will get added to the cyber attack inventory of state actors and freelance hackers for use whenever they wish to leverage old and known but never patched Windows 7 and Server 2008 vulnerabilities. My point is, we're now entering this era where there is going to be a growing inventory of ways to attack Windows 7 and Server 2008 that are never going to get fixed unless we go outside of Microsoft. So the zero patch guys, again, it's numeral 0, patch.com, zero patch, and they call that micropatch, have generated another of their micropatches to fix the problem for those who cannot obtain the official fix from Microsoft. And of course, anyone on the ESU, the Extended Services, is ESU or ESR? I thought it was ESU. I don't know what that stands for. Maybe it's Service Releases, ESR. Anyone on that plan will still be getting them, which is what's galling for all other Windows users who don't have them. So it's available to micropatches paying customers. The subscription is $26 per year per workstation. So what? A little over $2 per year per workstation. And in this case, it repairs the memory corruption issue in Windows GDI Plus by adding a block of code similar to the one Microsoft used in their official security fix. In other words, the micropatch guys are still getting the patches. They look at what Microsoft did and they go, oh yeah, okay. And they do the same thing and make it available to their customers.
Oh, Microsoft must not like that very much.
Yeah, too bad. Suck on that, Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
On systems where the micropatch is present, it implements a logically identical check. Now get this. If you were a subscriber a year ago, for example, at a little over $2 per month per workstation, you're already fixed. That is, micropatch has a little client module which is automatically updating your system as these micropatches become available without you having to do anything.
What could possibly go wrong with that?
You don't even need to reboot your system.
Oh my God.
So it's way better than Microsoft Windows in that sense. So get this. On systems where it's present, it implements a logically identical check to Microsoft's, but also records an exploitation attempt event before redirecting execution flow through the safe path. The patch for 32-bit systems is 4 instructions. The patch for 64-bit systems is 5 instructions. And Leo, there's a YouTube video here. You just might want to place into the stream. It's only a few seconds long, but it shows them doing the exploit, dropping an image on PowerPoint and PowerPoint crashing when the micropatch is turned off, and then they flip the micropatch protection on and they do the same thing, and it pops up a box saying that an exploit attempt was just caught. So it also gives you proactive information if someone tries to hack your system. So anyway, the next link is zeropatch.com/pricing.html. And it's not very expensive. They have a free version. They give some of the things away for free. They're hoping to upsell people, obviously, to a subscription, and they're not asking for a lot. So again, Windows 7 people can decide if you want to do sort of follow along with the podcast. For example, renaming the Adobe Type Manager DLL, just getting rid of it essentially for all time, solves that problem under Windows 7. There doesn't look like there's a similar fix other than something like this micropatch. So that's what you would need to do if you wanted ongoing protection. So
are you doing this? Would you do this?
I'm not doing it, but I am still on Windows 7. I do have, we do know that they're continuing the operation of Windows Defender, so that's continuing to protect us on an ongoing basis. I'm glad for that. Lawrence Abrams is 100% bullish about these guys. He knows them. He's talking to them all the time. He's covering them in detail. And I think they're
that's a good recommendation.
I think they're a legitimate outfit. In fact, I've been considering asking the micropatch guy to come on the show and talk to us and give us a sense for what they're doing.
Look into his eyes and see if he's trustworthy.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we can do that now virtually. Okay, so Chrome also, and since I put this together, I discovered that Edge is following, because of course Edge is now Chromium based. Last Wednesday, the 18th, Google announced that major Chrome browser and OS releases will be placed on hold due to the adjusted work schedules of employees having to work from home during the coronavirus sequestration. Their announcement stated that they would be placing priority on security, that is browser security, which makes sense. As we know, most new browser versions bring us a mixture of new features, or often these days the removal of some creaky old features like TLS 1.0 and 1.1. And of course, they also bring a bunch of security-related bug fixes. So during this work-at-home time, the Google Chrome development team will be working remotely and prioritizing security updates that will be released as Chrome version 80 updates. So 80 is where we are now, and so Google will be doing incremental updates to 80 rather than jumping to 81 as had been planned. Google's Chrome 80.0.3987.149 was released right after the company announced that Chrome 81 was delayed with security fixes which patched 13 high security vulnerabilities. So we just got an update to 80 fixing 13 high security vulnerabilities, and don't hold your breath for 81. 81 is on the back burner. It was originally slated to start rolling out last Tuesday on the 17th, but in the Google's developers blog, they said, we've decided that we're going to hold off on doing that. There was a bunch of stuff slated for release in that. Modernized appearance, hit testing for augmented reality, app icon badge support, and initial support for web NFC. We'll be waiting for that. We're just going to kind of hold on and just keep the existing Chrome secure. Oh, and also affected were Android developers, sort of indirectly. They were informed, well, Android because of Google, they were informed that they could now expect to experience significantly longer than normal app review times due to the adjusted work schedules, as up to 7 days or longer. A Google spokesman said, due to adjusted work schedules at this time, we're currently experiencing longer than usual review times. While the situation is currently evolving, app review times may fluctuate and may take 7 days or longer. So anyway, the coronavirus is, as we know, it's impacted Northern California, the so-called Silicon Valley, significantly, even though Google is spread out all over the place. The Northern California was one of the first to implement the stay-at-home orders from California's governor. And actually, I just heard this morning, I haven't seen any confirmation. Lori just told me that they're seeing some downturn finally. I mean, like the first indication of a downturn in the numbers in Northern California. So that would be amazing if that turned out to be the case. As we know, Avast has been having problems recently. They were behind one of the collisions with the Windows update that we talked about a few months ago. And, everyone knows, Leo, that you and I are both rather down on the idea of third-party AV. It's increasingly it's dare I say, the cure is worse than the problem it's solving.
Careful.
Yeah. We haven't heard much recently from Google's Tavis Ormandy, but earlier this month, he used a nifty tool he developed 3 years ago, excuse me, back in 2017. We've talked about it before. It allows Tavis to essentially excise Windows DLS and run them under Linux, where automated fuzzing and other security tests can be performed sort of in vitro as opposed to in vivo. It's a very cool concept. In this instance, this allowed Tavis to discover a trivially executed critical flaw in Avast's AV system. Tavis informed Avast, whereupon after a week of scrambling around, they finally disabled this critical component of their AV product altogether. What Tavis found, was a security flaw, a bad one, in Avast's JavaScript emulator engine, which is like an interpreter on steroids. And I can't even imagine embracing the idea of emulating the execution of JavaScript with the goal of analyzing its execution to discover anything malicious, anything that it decides is bad. Wow, that's like a heuristic on steroids. Anyway, it analyzes incoming JavaScript code for malicious action before allowing it to execute in browsers or email clients. Tavis wrote, quote, "Despite being highly privileged and processing untrusted input by design, it is unsandboxed and has poor mitigation coverage. Any vulnerabilities in this process are critical and easily accessible to remote attackers." He explained that exploitation of the bug was trivial once it was known. All it takes is sending a malicious JavaScript or Windows scripting host file to a user via email or tricking a user to access a booby-trapped file containing malicious JavaScript code. The faulty Avast engine would then stumble over the file, and the attacker would obtain system-level access with no restrictions. They could then have the ability to install malware on an Avast user's device because of Avast AV being present. So, as I mentioned, a week passed after Tavis notified Avast, and who knows what kind of urgency he put on them. We know that Tavis can be ruthless when it comes to imposing a deadline after which he's going to release the news, and he tends to do that with more urgency the more urgent the problems are that he find. He probably gave them only a week to do something. The problem would have been also that just fixing the one problem wouldn't have satisfied him. He talks about it not being sandboxed. Well, sandboxing this was probably a big project. So anyway, they scampered around for a week. Nothing happened. They were probably hoping to get some sort of a quick fix. Maybe they did, and Tavis said, no, we don't know what happened behind the scenes. But the problem is probably more systemic. So whatever the case, after a week, they decided to completely disable the JavaScript scanner functionality until it could be properly fixed. So now a significant, useful, but dangerous, and Avast users should be, I guess, glad they don't have it, because especially now that it's been discovered as being flawed and inadequate, it would make them put them at much more risk. So they issued a statement saying, last Wednesday, March 4th, Google vulnerability researcher Tavis Ormandy reported a vulnerability to us affecting one of our emulators. The vulnerability could have potentially been abused to carry out remote code execution. On March 9th, he released a tool, as he did on GitHub, to greatly simplify vulnerability analysis in the emulator. We have fixed this, and they didn't put it in quotes, I would have fixed this by disabling the emulator to ensure that our hundreds of millions of users are protected from any attacks. This won't affect the functionality. What? This won't affect the functionality of our AV product, which is based on multiple security layers. On the other hand, it will no longer find malicious JavaScript incoming. So there's no current timeline for when their patch will be ready. And again, this further reinforces what we have been saying, Leo, recently, that the third-party AV is really becoming a problem. It seems to be also the problem that Microsoft Update is stumbling over.
Yeah, that's right.
Time and again. Yeah. Remember those cute days of FireSheep?
The good old days.
Where it was easy to take over an account. You simply looked for cookies flying by on an unencrypted connection or on an open Wi-Fi, and grabbed the cookie and started sending it yourself. Suddenly you were logged in as the person whose cookie you captured, because, and I'll cover this a little bit more briefly in a second. Cookies are by their nature static. They're just little blobs which the browser regurgitates to the server, which is an inherent vulnerability that has not yet been solved. So it turns out that Kaspersky's security announcement was titled CookieThief, a cookie-stealing Trojan for Android. They've discovered a bunch of Trojans, which under the banner trojan-spy.androidios.cookiethief, they said a combination of new modifications to Android malware code has given rise to Trojans able to steal browser and app cookies from compromised devices. So on Thursday, March 12th, 12 days ago, the guys at Kaspersky revealed a new malware family, which thanks to their actions of discovery, they dubbed CookieThief, and the actions that this malware family takes. It uses a combination of exploits to acquire root rights on an Android device, which it then uses to steal the user's Facebook cookie data. And it was interesting that it's Facebook. Kaspersky wrote, "We recently discovered a new strain of Android malware. The Trojan," and then they give that same name, "turned out to be quite simple. Its main task was to acquire root rights on the victim device and transfer cookies used by the browser and the Facebook app to the cyber criminal's server. This abuse technique is possible not because of a vulnerability in the Facebook app or the browsers themselves. Malware could steal cookie files of any website from other apps in the same account and achieve similar results." So, as we know, cookie stealing is all about account hijacking. The only way, and this is the problem, the fundamental problem, in which a user's logged on session is maintained is with one or more secret cookies, which these days are marked secure, so they will only be sent over TLS browser queries. No more simple-minded FireSheep, which simply snag cookies over the HTTP channel after the user's connection reverted to HTTP following a brief secure interchange of username and password during logon. But simple static cookies represent a vulnerability. Unlike a more dynamic system like Squirrel, which always requires the client to solve a cryptographic problem and to return its solution with every query, thus reproving its identity every time, cookies are just static blobs of data. Although they might be changed periodically, they're simply regurgitated by the browser, which always returns the most recently set cookies for the domain. And of course, the emergence of OAuth, which uses the logged on status at one site to authenticate the user's identity at other sites, means that someone obtaining a user's Facebook cookies also obtains the ability to impersonate them elsewhere, since they appear to be validly logged on to Facebook. This would allow them to log on as that user at other sites, which offer a log on with Facebook option, thus spreading the impersonation further. Kaspersky wrote, "On the command and control server, we also found a page advertising services for distributing spam on social networks and messengers." They said, so it was not difficult to guess the motive behind the cookie theft operation. In other words, they've got a Trojan, which is out there in the wild, obtaining root access for the purpose of obtaining Facebook logon credentials, sending them back to the command and control server. So they're building up a library of valid Facebook authentication and advertising services for distributing spam on social networks. In other words, they're going to accept spam advertising for sale and then turn around and use this continuous churning base of logon credentials to send the spam through the people's Facebook accounts whom they have commandeered. It turns out it's a little more complicated to do this and get away with it. They're unable to send those out directly because the fact that would come from a different IP might set off Facebook. So there's another piece of this, which is a proxy, which is also installed as part of this malware, such that the proxy sends the proxy logs on as the user using the stolen credentials, accepts the advertising from the command and control server, and then sends it from the user's own phone under their credentials. So anyway, this is just sort of an interesting anatomy of an example of the way that an Android malware system is able to commercialize people apparently sending spam from their own accounts out onto the internet. Amazing what these guys will do. And Leo, I think we're about halfway through. I think you said we had two sponsors.
We have one right now, yes. Just in the nick of time. Actually, it's a great sponsor because it's hot stuff. It's wasabi. just in time for your cup of coffee. A little hot wasabi, my friend. Wasabi is an amazing story. My friend, David Friend, created it with his CTO some time ago. They actually created what I thought was a really smart way of writing to hard drives by blocks instead of by sectors, which made it much more efficient, much faster. It's what David and Jeff Flowers founded Carbonite based on that. And now they've moved on to the next thing, which is Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. I mean, imagine cloud storage that's 80% less expensive than Amazon S3, but it works just like S3. It uses the S3 API. But they don't charge for egress or API access. That's one of the ways they save you a lot of money. In fact, typically you could store data in Wasabi's cloud for less than just the annual maintenance fee for your on-prem storage. It's really that inexpensive. $5.99 per terabyte per month. That's nothing. And again, no charge for API calls, no charge for egress, just for the data on there. And you can, by the way, say that some data or all data is immutable, which makes it impervious to ransomware attacks, to human error. That means it is, more durable. In fact, 11 nines of durability. 11 nines. They're on multiple network operations centers, but they also do regular integrity checking. Every file gets checked once with every 90 days, which means if there's even one bit off, they go to the other operations center and they say, okay, we need that copy, check that, yeah, that's good, and replace it. You're never going to lose a bit. Tier 4 data center facilities. That means they're highly secure, and of course it's fully redundant, so you're completely secure by default. I would argue that this is not only less expensive, but it's more secure, it's safer than your on-prem storage. Wasabi data is always encrypted at rest, even if the requesting party doesn't specify encryption. It's, of course, encrypted in travel. They follow industry best security models and design practices, things like access control mechanisms like bucket policies and ACLs. So you can say this person has access to this, but not this. High quality storage for $5.99 a terabyte a month. HIPAA compliant, FINRA compliant, CGIS compliant, 80% cheaper. I didn't even mention it's 6 times faster than S3 using this new technology. I couldn't be more happy about Wasabi. Initially, when they came on, I thought, well, this will be a big enterprise play. But I talked to a lot of people now, same kind of people who used Jungle Disk back in the day to back up to S3, who are using Wasabi the same way as their personal backup or their backup for their NAS. It's a great price, and it's really great service. Wasabi.com. Here's what I would suggest. Try it free with unlimited storage for a month. Really bang on it. Upload a bunch of stuff. See how fast it is. See how reliable it is. Use immutability, then try to change it. You really bang on it. It's free for unlimited for a month when you go to wasabi.com and use the offer code security now. Migrating to the cloud does not have to be scary. It does not have to be painful. It actually could be more secure and more reliable than that hard drive you've got in the rack over there. Wasabi, wasabi.com. Use the offer code security now, and you'll get that free trial. And you'll let them know you heard it here, and that's very important to us. Wasabi is a great sponsor. They're a great supporter of Security Now, and we want to keep them happy and in the fold. So go to wasabi.com, wasabi.com, and use the offer code Security Now. Let's see. Let's get back to the show. What do you say?
I think that's what we're here for.
Let's do it, Steve. I had a question for you, but maybe I'll save it. A listener asked the radio show so I would ask you something. So don't let me forget. We'll save it for the miscellanea coming up.
Okay.
Yep.
So PwnToOwn Spring 2020.
Oh, I love this. It's hysterical.
Last Friday was the second and final day the second and final of 2 days of the 2020 Spring edition of HackerOne's always interesting PwnToOwn hacking contest. This year's winner is perhaps unsurprisingly, our listeners will know them well, Team Fluoroacetate, formed by the security pair Amat Kama and Richard Zhu. They won the contest after accumulating 9 points across the 2-day competition and extended their dominance by winning their 4th tournament in a row. There were, 6 contestants. They were at the top with 9. Then the next one was at 7, and then 4, 4, 3, and 0. So a nice spread. And interestingly, I just have to wonder, these guys just seem to pull this stuff out of their hat. And it's like, okay.
Well, they save it all year. They're just, that's why it was a little concerning because CanSec West in Vancouver, because of COVID, was called off. So I love how they did this. They had the hackers mail in their exploits.
Right. So, of course, since no one is currently meeting face-to-face,
right,
and since the PwnToOwn hacking contest has always been held during the CanSec West Cybersecurity Conference occurring in the spring in Vancouver, which, as you said, this year, this year's PwnToOwn is the first ever hacking contest hosted virtually. Although it sacrificed some of the in-person drama, the participants sent their exploits to the PwnToOwn organizers in advance. The organizers then ran the code during a live stream with all participants present. So,
it kept them kosher.
And it still preserved much of the breath holding because it was like, okay, is this going to work?
Plus, I think that's a good. If your exploit can be automated that way, that's a big deal, right? You don't have to sit there and go, let me try this. Oh, no, that didn't work. Let me try this. If you can make a script and it works, more power to you.
Yep.
Right.
It doesn't require your last minute sort of finessing to stroke the enter key just right in order to slip that bug through.
I think the scores were a little lower this time because of that, but to be honest, because I think there is a certain amount of that.
Yeah. Well, only one failed. So during the competition's 2-day schedule, 6 teams managed to hack apps and operating systems, including Windows, Mac, Ubuntu, Safari, Adobe Reader, and Oracle VirtualBox. Yeah. All the bugs, as always, exploited during the contest were immediately reported to their respective companies. So what happened? The first exploit of the first day was attempted by the Georgia Tech Systems Software and Security Lab team, who targeted Apple Safari. And get this, Leo, with a Mac OS kernel escalation of privilege, so a browser-based kernel escalation attack. Yikes. But the exploit succeeded when the Georgia Tech team used a 6-bug exploit chain.
Wow.
Which just makes me shake my head. I just think, oh my God, chaining together a series of 6 small flaws in order to amplify the effect of each and get yourself in. they managed to pop up the calculator app on Mac OS and escalate its access rights to root. So that demonstrates they could run anything that they wanted to, feed it commands to do things behind your back with full root access. And they earned a well-deserved $70,000 and 7 Master of Pwn points for that. The second exploit attempt was launched by Fluorescence, which is just Richard Zhu by himself.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So he works both as a team and by himself.
Right.
He did pretty well just by himself.
Yes, he did. He targeted Microsoft Windows with a local privilege escalation and succeeded. He used a use after free vulnerability in the Windows API to escalate his local privilege. And that is to say, as we know, as I was just saying, that local privilege escalation, the idea of not running as an admin being protection against some zero-day GDI flaw shouldn't give anyone any comfort, because local privilege escalations are all over the place. Yeah. Anyway, he found another one, earning himself $40,000 and 4 points toward Master of Pwn. The third exploit was brought by Manfred Paul of the Red Rocket CTF team, who targeted Ubuntu desktop with a local privilege escalation.
How did he get in? Because I want to know about that one.
And it, too, was successful. Yeah. He's a newcomer to PwnToOwn who used an improper input validation bug. So there, again, a bit of an interpreter.
Sanitize your inputs, folks.
If you're looking at input, you have to be very careful at your code what looks at input, because it's possible for the input itself to attack you, which you're trying to prevent from a sanitation standpoint. And there was a problem. He was able to escalate privileges and earn $30,000 and 3 Master of Pwn points. And in all of these cases, we're not getting full detail yet.
Yeah, because I'd like to know what app it was, or know, what was it that let him do that.
Well, we've got to give the companies behind these things time to go, ooh, crap, and then push out a fix before it becomes more widely known. Is it a
widespread kernel flaw or something unique that Ubuntu was doing, or what?
Yeah, and we're just happy these guys are wearing white hats.
Well, that's one point to make, is that they have to turn these exploits over to the company afterwards.
Right. So. Yeah, well, this is a HackerOne run operation, so everything is about the good side, where Zerodium is the bad side of this whole deal. So for the fourth exploit, the fluoroacetate team was back, setting their sights on Microsoft Windows with a local privilege escalation. As I said, they're everywhere. They succeeded in leveraging a use after free bug in Windows.
You keep hearing that, don't you? Yep.
Yeah. Yep. To escalate themselves to full system privilege and earned $40,000 and 4 more Master of Pwn points. The second day began when Star Labs targeted Oracle's VirtualBox for the first exploit in the virtualization category, and it succeeded. The researcher used an out-of-bands read bug for an information leak and an uninitialized variable for code execution on the VirtualBox hypervisor.
That's a little more sophisticated.
That is a VM escape. Yeah, you don't want code running on the hypervisor. He did it, and he took home $40,000 for his effort and got 4 Master of Pwn points. The fluoroacetate team came back one final time for the 6th exploit of the competition, targeting Adobe Reader with a Windows.
You shouldn't get any points for that.
Yeah,
that should be just.
Exactly I know.
Okay.
Reader, oh come on, really? Except it turns out it was a complex combination of Reader and obtaining a local privilege escalation. They employed a pair of 2 use after free bugs, one in Acrobat and one in the Windows kernel, in order to hike their privileges and to gain complete control over the system. That one got them 50,000 points, $50,000 and 5 points towards the Master of Pwn. Only one exploit failed, during the competition, which was the 7th and final one. It was made by the Synactive team. They targeted VMware Workstation, obviously, and also in the virtualization category. But as I noted, the attempt failed when they were unable to get their exploit to function in the allotted time. So overall, despite doing this virtually, we were still able to have an interesting and worthwhile and hopefully motivational PwnToOwn meeting. These guys are taking home some serious bread, and it's definitely worth.
I think they should stream this like esports. I mean, seriously,
it would be really.
This is cool. Yeah,
it seriously is. So I had a couple of just sort of observations and discoveries relative to where we are today with the coronavirus that I wanted to share with our listeners. I wanted to mention testing briefly because, we've all been hearing about testing. What has become clear to me as I've been reading a lot about this is that this PCR test, technically called an RT-PCR, reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, it had the benefit of being quick to design, but the serious liability of never really being scalable. And frankly, after I've understood what's involved, I'm astonished that other countries are managing to perform this test. As far as I know, this is what they're still using. They're able to perform this test in the kind of volume they are. It is extremely labor intensive. It's very slow. It takes at least 4 hours and often more, and it's expensive. It ties up equipment during that time. It tends to burn through the very scarce personal protective equipment, because when you get this flexible synthetic, it can't be a cotton swab, it has to be a synthetic swab because cotton interacts with the virus. When you get this flexible synthetic swab shoved further up your nose than you knew your nose went, it's very uncomfortable. People invariably cough or sneeze, thus polluting the local environment, and that means that the person administering the test has to change and discard this round of personal protective equipment. It's just never going to be a solution for mass testing. And it's turning out that there was some interesting input back from China that suggested that they're seeing a significant level of false negatives, meaning it is not successfully detecting somebody with the problem. The reason is that the actual virus is operating down in our lungs, and at the very top of our upper respiratory system, there just may not be any. The virus apparently takes up shop for 3 or 4 days up in our throat, which is why a sore throat is the very first symptom that most people report. And it is often transient, and then the virus moves down into our lungs, where it, of course, causes famous all kinds of havoc. Anyway, where we're headed, and we're there in terms of the design, but not yet in terms of availability. There's a broad class of tests known as ELISA tests that came online in 1971. ELISA is an abbreviation for enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. And here's a description from one of the very many pieces of work that's currently underway. The guys that have designed a test, just to give you a sense for it, said to create the test, the researchers began by designing a slightly altered version of the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2 outer coat. They said the alterations made the protein more stable for use in the lab. That protein helps the virus enter cells, and it is a key target in the immune reaction against the virus, as the body churns out antibodies that recognize the protein and tag the virus for destruction. So, in other words, this is the thing that they want, that our body needs to learn to recognize, and that they want their test to be able to use. They said they also isolated the short piece of the spike chain protein called the receptor binding protein, RBD, which the virus uses to attach to cells it tries to invade. They then used cell lines to reproduce large quantities of the altered spike proteins and RBDs. Those lab-made molecules provided the basis for an ELISA test, in which antibodies in a sample of blood or plasma trigger a color change when they recognize a target protein, here an RBD or the spike protein. Initial tests of 4 blood samples from 3 confirmed COVID-19 patients and from 59 serum samples banked before the start of the outbreak showed that the test worked as antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 bound to the test's proteins. It showed positive results only for the COVID-19 patients and not for any of those controls. So that's a little bit of sort of behind the scenes of how these tests are developed, and the fact that we're in the process of moving past this existing PCR test with all of its many problems. It's going to take a while for labs to ramp up, for the supply chain to get into place, and for these to get standardized. The FDA has already approved one of these, and as we know, one of the great things, in my opinion, that our administration has done is to really take the shackles off of the typical way overprotective FDA safeguards in order to get these things out into use as soon as, maybe mistakes will be made, but, what we really need is visibility, and having a finger prick test, that anyone can do in a few minutes will be incredibly useful. It'll give us the first sense of visibility. And the other thing I just sort of wanted to mention from a math standpoint is how I'm just infuriated every time I see the popular press say there are 30,000 cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. No, there are 30,000 people who were tested positive. But as we know, globally, not just in the U.S., but a tiny fraction of people were tested. And so we still have absolutely no sense for how widespread this is. And this is no one's fault. This PCR test, as I said, is a disaster with multiple reagents. It's extremely labor intensive to do. It was never scalable the way on a scale that we need. But when I've been thinking about this, I've realized that we are never going to test all, 330 million citizens in the U.S. Maybe we'll test a statistically significant sample so that from a statistics standpoint, we can know with some level of certainty that, okay, we found this percentage of positives in a heterogeneous sample cohort of a certain size. So we know that with reasonable certainty, it can't be more than this or fewer than that. But still, we don't have 100% visibility. What occurred to me, and it's a little bit morbid, but it's true, is one thing that we absolutely know is the death toll that this is taking. That is, we know the other end point of some percentage of these sicknesses. And so the only thing, because the how many people have it, quote unquote, is just complete nonsense. It's not of any use. What is of use is, unfortunately, the shape of the death curve. The problem is it lags, as we know, at least on the order of 2 or 3 weeks behind the who has it and could be tested to have it curve. So that means that, as we know, everything is moving very rapidly here. So unfortunately, using the count of people who have died isn't useful for making real-time policy decisions, which you'd like to be making three weeks earlier, but we just still don't have that data. But for me, from a epidemiological standpoint, as long as the curve is going upwards, we don't know where it will end. It is only when the slope starts to slow or hopefully reverse, and that we stop seeing an increased rate of dying, that we'll know that 3 weeks earlier than that, things were being done that were slowing down the spread. So anyway, I just sort of wanted to, I've talked about this a few times in other forums, and I just sort of thought it's interesting to remind ourselves that, the one real number we have, sad as it is how many people this thing is taking out. And nobody needs tests to determine that, sadly. Also, last week I shared a GRC shortcut, grc.sc/COVID, which was that Ars Technica backgrounder. I have two more. The first one is, oh my God, it is so wonderful. It is an animated presentation of sort of the whole situation. It's an explainer for the whole family, and it's so well done, so kind of with a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, not taking itself very seriously. I hope that our listeners will grab it and arrange to put it on a big screen for the whole family to watch. And that's grc.sc/COVID2, COVID2. It basically walks its viewer through this entire thing. Like, why exactly does hand washing work?
I loved the info about how the virus works that gives you the information about cleaning up. This is from a 16 million views on this, by the way. It's from a channel called Kurzgesagt, which means, I guess, in a nutshell.
and Mark Thompson knew about it. And he said, "Oh yeah, I love the work that those guys do.
They do a lot of good science stuff." And I'm guessing he's German because of the accent, but also because of the name. But it's very well done. Yeah.
Oh, anyway, I cannot recommend it highly enough to our listeners. You can find it grc.sc/COVID2.
Yeah.
Okay, now the third one is way higher level. This is not for everybody. Certainly not. So it is medical school level whiteboard explanation of where the coronaviruses have been originating, the original source of the pathogen, its mutation over time. It's a whiteboard presentation by a guy who I grew increasingly respectful for.
Ninja nerd science.
Wow, it is really good.
He's got good whiteboard skills, I can tell.
Yes, he does, and he's like rubbing mistakes out. He's like changing colors. He prints clearly enough that you're able to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so for our listeners who can weather like the real down in the details medical science. I mean, and it's funny too, because one of our one of the guys in the grc.health news group named Ian, after he watched it, he posted, "Okay, I'm ready to move on to the anxiety counseling video now."
Yeah.
Because
no
I mean,
it's scary.
It's grim.
Yeah.
It is grim. But anyway, so grc.sc/COVID2 for the family-friendly, amazing animated. And this is the one you're going to want to share with everybody that you guys know. And then COVID-3 for like, okay, just sit down and you'll be in medical school for about 50 minutes, but you'll come out the other end having a real sense for what's going on.
I will watch that one tonight because I watched the other one and I loved it. And in fact, we did exactly what you suggested, which is put it on the big screen and got everybody to sit down and watch it because it was a really good explainer.
Oh my God, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, So
can I ask before we get to the topic of the day?
Yeah.
A listener has called me now twice on the radio show to say, what the hell size of the mug is that? Steve and his giant mugs, of course, occasions interest among all. But he says that at one point on a show, you mentioned why you don't want to use wireless headphones, like that there might be some health risk associated with that.
Oh, gosh, I have avoided talking about this.
Okay.
We actually do have some science about this.
Okay.
There is something in the structure of our brain known as the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
It sounds like some wall of Jericho or something, but it's not. It's the fancy name for a different form of endothelial lining in all the capillaries which feed nutrition to our brain. So it's just a different interface lining for blood-borne stuff, allowing only some things to get through. Yeah. And it's for me as someone who's like wanting to experiment with things, interesting chemicals like GABA are unable to pass the blood-brain barrier. So you have to use a precursor, tryptophan, which is able to pass, being a simpler amino acid, in order to get tryptophan in, and then you get an increased production of GABA inside, and so forth. So, what has been shown is that cellular frequency and power significantly increases the porosity, the porousness of our blood-brain barrier. Some researchers were able to place some chemicals outside, which would normally never be seen inside, and then use nothing more than the equivalent power of a cell phone transmitting at your head and demonstrate uptake into the interior of our brain, these chemicals. So
in
Lori
other
and
words, it might make the blood-brain barrier more porous. It's funny because this is, when we talk about the damages from RF, what I consistently say is, well, the problem, with that, of course, is that RF is not the kind of radiation that would damage cell structure, and it diminishes with distance by such a great deal and at such low power to begin with that it seems unlikely, and there's never been any evidence that cell-style radio transitions, or for that matter, transmissions, or for that matter, Bluetooth, would cause damage to the cells. It's non-ionizing radiation. But this is a completely different kind of damage, and I doubt anybody's even looked at this except for this study that you're quoting.
It's why I believe it is science-based, and I'll see if I can find the article, and if I can.
And this is not.
It's around.
This is something caused by the RF, not by. For instance, one of the things I've heard some people say is, well, if you're worried about cell phone radiation and you use Bluetooth headset to protect yourself by plugging in or you don't want to use Bluetooth because of the radiation there, plugging in a wire just puts a direct line from the cell phone into your ear, so it wouldn't necessarily be.
It does serve it. It does serve as an antenna.
Yeah.
Lori very, very reliably holds the phone about a foot away. It is the case that the power drop is dramatic.
Yeah, it's the inverse of the square of the distance. So
it's also the case that when it's at your ear, you have a transmitter there that is reaching out to a cell tower.
Right.
So and we know how quickly it drains the battery in our phone. I mean, it's not a low bit of power. We're all wanting the convenience of this not being a problem. I just hope it won't be a problem.
There's no evidence of increased brain cancer from cell phone use, and we've had it now for more than a decade. So, but this porousness of the blood-brain barrier is intriguing. I don't know what the consequences would be. It might be illnesses, not cancer illnesses, but other illnesses or other issues
Well, and who knows,
Who knows, yeah.
Alzheimer's or dementia or other things that seem to be on the rise that we're like, oh, look, why do we have more of this now?
Yeah.
Or ADHD that seems to be a plague.
Right.
You know, it's like, you know, we're mucking with something that wasn't designed to happen. So yeah, fortunately, I'm just not a phone talker. I never have occasion to do it. And Lori's really good about using her speakerphone function.
Yeah.
So that's the answer, and I'll find the paper because I imagine our listeners would. And I imagine now that I've opened the Pandora's box to this,
put a link in.
a lot of people are going to say, "Hey, Gibson!"
Yeah,
it's like, okay, slow down.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is telling you what I read, and it looked legit. Okay, TRRespass, TRRespass. The short version is the fixes for RowHammer have not worked.
Oh.
Yeah. We began covering RowHammer half this podcast ago, 6 years in 2014. And remember, we should not confuse RowHammer with the more theoretical processor architecture attacks such as Spectre and Meltdown. They were important because they showed how the tricky designs used to increase processor performance could be leveraged against us. But they were never easy to pull off in the field. The researchers have shown over and over again, and I found a bullet point list of things they did. They've shown that RowHammer is a much more real and significant threat. So to quickly recap, researchers 6 years ago discovered that the main bulk volatile DRAM lying at the heart of every system we use was not nearly as robust anymore as we'd always assumed. Over the years, under the pressure to deliver ever more DRAM density, the memory storage cells had been successively reduced in size to the point where they were operating right on the hairy edge of, quote, we can't make them any smaller, unquote. And think about it, Leo. Remember the RAM we used to have that was like, you know, a few megs or maybe a gig?
Yeah. Now
you're plugging in, 64 gig in the same size chunk. So it's like, okay, what's the story? And DRAM parity checking and error correction technologies, which were originally intended to protect against the stray cosmic ray hitting and flipping a bit, they're increasingly being used to buffer the DRAM's underlying reduced reliability. We can think of this in terms of a noise margin, where there's a given certainty that a DRAM cell's voltage represents a 0 or a 1. And over time, in the pursuit of DRAM density, the noise margin has been successively reduced. Well, the ever clever, ever loving researchers, and this is Herbert Boss and his gang back at University of Amsterdam and some others, showed the world back then that by forcing atypical DRAM access patterns to deliberately create higher environmental noise, that is like noise in the area, it was possible to cause modern DRAM to malfunction in such a way that with some control over this, individual bits could be flipped. Since today's processors use DRAM-based tables to manage their memory virtualization, they then demonstrated, the researchers, all of the various sorts of mischief that could be created by flipping bits in these DRAM-based management tables and much more. Malicious RowHammering processes could give themselves full access to other processes, give themselves read-write access into the Windows OS or any OS kernel and more. So through the ensuing years, and here's my bullet list, researchers showed how a RowHammer attack could alter data stored in DDR3 and DDR4 memory. They showed how a RowHammer attack could be carried out via JavaScript, via the web, and not requiring access to a PC physically or via local malware. They demoed a RowHammer attack that took over Windows computers through the Microsoft Edge browser. They demoed a RowHammer attack that took over Linux-based virtual machines installed in cloud hosting environments. They used a RowHammer attack to get root permissions on Android smartphones. They bypassed RowHammer protections put in place after the disclosure of the first attacks. They showed how an attacker could improve the efficiency of a RowHammer attack by relying on local GPU cards. They developed a technique to launch RowHammer attacks via network packets. They developed a RowHammer attack that targets an Android memory subsystem called Ion, and which broke the isolation between the OS and local apps, allowing data theft and total device control. They developed a RowHammer attack named ECCSploit that works even against modern RAM cards that use error-correcting code. They discovered RAM bleed, a RowHammer attack variation that can exfiltrate data from attack systems, not just alter it. And they developed the technique to speed up RowHammer attacks with the help of field programmable gate array cards in an attack named Jackhammer. So these guys have been busy. The solution to all of this RowHammer mess was supposed to be a series of mitigations collectively referred to as target row refresh, TRR, and thus the TRRespass, trespass, target row refresh. And we've talked about that too. The idea being that noise immunity can be maintained if DRAM rows in the areas of unusually high activity, which we've learned would tend to soften their stored bits, are proactively brought up for refresh more often, thus reasserting their zeroness and oneness. TRR has been gradually implemented and has been rolling out over the past 6 years. And back then, we were talking about, DDR4, that'll be the answer, because that's new, that's coming online, and that's going to be the solution. They were the first ones to receive the TRR, the target row refresh protections. And for a while, vendors believed that they had finally plugged the RowHammer issue. But you always have to worry when you hear the term mitigation, as in, well, we really didn't fix it, but we made it much better. The original RowHammer guys, led by Herbert Boss and his team from Amsterdam University in league with researchers from ETH Zurich and Qualcomm, recently released their paper titled TRRespass, spelled their funny way, Exploiting the Many Sides of Target Row Refresh. I think I'm about to sneeze. Maybe not. I love sneezing.
Oh, so good.
Nose tickle. In this research, I think it passed, they outlined their development of a generic tool called TRRespass that can be used to upgrade the old RowHammer attacks to work on the new and improved TRR-protected DDR4 RAM. So here's how they summarized their work. They have 3 paragraphs. After a plethora of high-profile RowHammer attacks, CPU and DRAM manufacturers scrambled to deliver what was meant to be the definitive hardware solution against the RowHammer problem, target row refresh. A common belief among practitioners is that on the latest generation of DDR4 systems that are protected by TRR, RowHammer is no longer an issue in practice. However, in reality, very little is known about TRR. How does it work? How is it deployed? And is it actually effective against RowHammer? We want to know. In this paper, we demystify the inner workings of TRR and debunk its security guarantees. We show that what is advertised as a single mitigation is actually a series of different solutions coalesced under the umbrella term target row refresh. We inspect and disclose via a deep analysis different existing TRR solutions and demonstrate that modern implementations operate entirely inside DRAM chips. What they meant by that was that it wasn't clear whether some of this might be done by the DRAM controller, which is upstream of the chips. What they learned was DRAM controllers are still asleep. They didn't bother with this at all. All the responsibility was given to the DRAM chips themselves. They said, despite the difficulties of analyzing in DRAM mitigations, we describe novel techniques for gaining insights into the operation of these mitigations. These insights allow us to build TRRespass, a scalable black box RowHammer fuzzer that we evaluate on 42 recent DDR4 DIMMs. TRRespass shows that even the latest generation DDR4 systems within DRAM TRR immune to all known RowHammer attacks are often still vulnerable to new TRR-aware variants of RowHammer that we have developed. In particular, TRRespass finds that on present-day DDR4 modules, RowHammer is still possible when many aggressor rows are used. They said even 19 in some cases. Actually, it turns out 4 is enough. Aggressor rows being the neighborly adjoining rows, which are used to induce bit flips. They said in a configuration we generally refer to as many-sided RowHammer, overall, our analysis shows that 13 out of the 42 DIMMs from all 3 major DRAM manufacturers, Samsung, Micron, and Hynix, are vulnerable to our TRR-aware RowHammer attack patterns, and thus one can still mount existing state-of-the-art RowHammer attacks. In addition to DDR4, we also experiment with LP DDR4 chips and show that they are susceptible to RowHammer bit flips too. Our results provide concrete evidence that the pursuit of better mitigations must continue. So what has essentially happened is that DRAM manufacturers looked at the existing RowHammer attacks. They didn't actually solve the RowHammer problem because, frankly, they can't. The RowHammer problem does not arise from some defect in DRAM. It is insidious because it arises from the underlying technology of DRAM for which there can be no quick fix. So what did they do? They designed, the manufacturers, the DRAM manufacturers designed internal, secret, proprietary hardware mitigation workarounds for the various specific known RowHammer attacks. So the various things that were done before, indeed, no longer work. The undaunted researchers reverse engineered what was going on by inside the DRAM controllers by very carefully examining the updated DRAM. They used a side channel analysis of DRAM in order to figure out what the algorithms were in the DRAM controllers. And once they'd learned the tricks that had been incorporated, they simply evolved different attacks to bypass those new tricks. They had 3 observations in their notes. They said the TRR mitigation carries out a targeted refresh on every refresh command. Second observation, the mitigation can sample more than one aggressor per refresh interval. The third observation, the mitigation can refresh only a single victim within a refresh operation. So in other words, those are examples of the things they learned about what was being done in DRAM controllers. And they came up with, based on these observations, we conclude that hammering more than 4 rows should circumvent the mitigation. We confirm this by running a test on our FPGA infrastructure with standard conditions. And I'm not going to go through their conclusions, but because they're largely repetitious, but I did highlight in red here. our results provide evidence that the pursuit of effective RowHammer mitigation must continue, and that the security by obscurity strategy of DRAM vendors puts computing systems at risk for extended periods of time. And I missed the thing that I thought I'd said there, or I'd highlighted there. I know what it was. Here it is. This paper shows that despite significant mitigation efforts, modern DDR4 systems are still vulnerable to the RowHammer vulnerability, and even more vulnerable than before once the mitigations are bypassed. So essentially, the DDR4 memory that, again, bumped up its capacity and increased the fundamental problem, implemented some heuristic design tricks to solve, they thought, the increased fundamental problem resulting from reduced noise margins in DDR4 higher speed, higher density chips. So they tried to work around that by making a fancy controller, but it turns out that's algorithmic. You can figure out the algorithms and you can sidestep them. So, I just tip of the hat to the researchers who did this. Without this, we would all just say, oh, look, RowHammer no longer works. Yeah, it's worse than it was before, because now we have DDR4 and the protection algorithms can be bypassed.
Wow. What a story. Yeah. Steve, thank you as always. Steve Gibson, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear it for Steve. Round of applause for Steve Gibson, man of the hour. Security Now is every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. If you want to watch us do it live, that's 20:30 UTC. You can just watch the live stream at twit.tv/live. You can listen to live audio too. I think more and more, because of COVID-19, conferences and events are disappearing. People are not getting together in person, but a show like this is a great opportunity to get the information you need without having to leave your house. So we really appreciate it. In fact, if you subscribe, you'll get it every episode. You don't want to miss an episode. Just go to your favorite podcast client and subscribe. Steve has 16 kilobit versions for people who don't want to use the bandwidth on his website, grc.com. He also has transcriptions written by humans, not by machines. So Elaine does a great job writing those out, and they make it a little easier if you want to follow along as you listen. That's all at grc.com. While you're there, get a copy of SpinRite, the world's best hard drive maintenance and recovery utility. Steve's scribbling right now, writing like crazy to make the next version of SpinRite. You'll get it for free. You'll even be able to beta test it if you buy SpinRite right now. grc.com. Lots of other stuff at grc.com, including
I actually just this morning I posted a thanks for your patience note to the grc.spinrite.dev group, who have been patiently waiting for me to return. I was down for the week between these podcasts. I'm really
glad you rested and took it easy. And I want to agree with Lori. Don't do it if it's going to take it out of you.
Well, I really thank the global pandemic for fitting nicely in between Security Now episodes, because I was able to emerge for a little burst of podcast last week, and then I was pretty much laid flat for a few days.
You need to take it. You need to take it easy, Steve. We can't afford to lose you.
I love my body. It always performs for
Lisa
me.
wanted me to tell you that you got to take care of yourself, because in this COVID day and age, we get more and more advertisers who want to be on Security Now because they know this is how you reach that audience. When you can't have a conference, when you can't get in front of them any other way, advertising on Security Now is the best way to do it. And they always mention you and how much they love you. So thank you, Steve. We really appreciate it. You may be the last man standing as the Twit Network slowly whittles down to nothing. But this show will go on. We have, as I mentioned, at twit.tv/SN, we've got audio and video of the show. But again, the best thing to do is subscribe in your favorite podcast application so you don't miss a minute. And we will be back here next Tuesday. Steve will be fit as a fiddle, and we'll have a lot more information for you. Thanks, Steve.
Yes, sir, my friend. Glad to be here. Glad to do it. And I'll see you next week. Bye.
Security now.